representatives from 12 Commonwealth countries are calling on King Charles III to apologise for the horrific and enduring impacts of colonisation and the legacy of genocide. Furthermore, some South Africans are saying the United Kingdom should return the Star of Africa, the largest diamond in the world, in the royal sceptre that King Charles III will hold at his coronation today. Is this a good start for the reign of the new British monarch? Well, joining me now to unpack these developments is Lebohang Pheko, a senior researcher at the Trade Collective. Pheko, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us via telephone link on our program this morning. As I mentioned there in the intro, lots of discourse around the legacy, the colonial legacy that the UK, for some people, has still gone unanswered for. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, just a kind correction. I'm a senior research fellow, which is senior to a researcher. I think in terms of the actual legacy of colonialism and the British role in that, well, I think what has happened is that the demise of Elizabeth has really illustrated that there's a passing of the guard and a change of times. We need to remember that at the moment when she became the Queen of England in 1952, if I believe, the world was entirely different. The way that media was being consumed and curated was completely different to the way that it has been over the last 10, 15, 20 years, which means that the royal family, the British royal family, and I suppose the class elite were able to curate an image of themselves that was extremely exclusive, that was elusive, that really shrouded them with mystique. So whatever their wrongdoings as in their own personal capacity was not known, unlike today when we are aware of some of the really unfortunate and scandalous behavior of several members of the British royal family, including, of course, Prince Andrew, and those very damaging behaviors and allegations. Another thing, of course, is that that was at a time when the crown, the British crown, as we know, was supposedly sovereign or had dominion over a third of the global population, which, of course, also was in tandem with really toxic social mores in the global north around, people's humanity, Darwinist ideas that African people and black and brown people of the world were really, that white people, especially the British, had almost a duty to civilize. All of those ideas have been dismantled over the last 10, the last 50 or more years. But I think the problem with this is that King Charles of England, other than his own personal unpopularity, other than that, a lot of people are very unhappy, and aggrieved over the way that he behaved towards Lady Diana, the affair with who is his now wife, Camilla, and that people hold the royal family as human beings. They hold them to account as human beings, not as these mythical figures. And lastly, of course, as you rightly say, there is a global wave towards ideas of republicanism that we've seen sweeping the Caribbean. The president of Jamaica has said he's not coming. Barbados ceded. And there are huge arguments and rightful conversations about reparations. And I think that, as you say, people want to see the return of the star, which was one of the biggest diamonds ever discovered in the world, in the Colonial mines. There are also several other pieces of jewelry, pieces of treasures that belong to India, to several African countries. And this sort of notion that it is acceptable in any way for a colonial plundering power to hold on to things that came into their possession by theft and plunder is incredibly unpalatable in 2023. And beyond the fact that Prince Charles, or King Charles now of England, has expressed and I quote, deep personal regret for the legacies of colonialism and the pain that it has caused, he has not made any statement whatsoever about what they as an entity, as an institution, are going to do to begin to correct this toxic legacy.
Right. Pheko, talking about how unpalatable the fact that the British monarchy continues to hold on to these items is in 2023. King Charles has been quoted as being a monarch who has a vision for the monarchy that, espouses ideas of modernity. And we're expected to see it be reflected quite at length during his coronation today. We know, for instance, that the Queen Consort Camilla has resolved to, in fact, take out the Colonial diamond, the diamond that belongs to several South Asian countries, to take it out of the crown that she'll actually be wearing today. Some have interpreted that as an opportunity to avoid controversy, but is it enough, it seems, to manage this growing narrative, this growing discord, rather, around the fact that the monarchy continues to hold on to these items and hasn't really taken on a much more solidified stance, a harder line on apologizing and having conversations around reparations?
Yes, Elsie. I think we both know the answer to that question. Taking out a crown and a few diamonds out of the crown symbolically, without giving them back, is a really petty gesture. It's actually quite insulting. If you were returning it to its rightful owners, returning it to the nation of India, that might perhaps begin to be indicative, but should not be seen as vindicating them or in any way vindicating the inherent racism that has built the colonial crown. And I think it's very difficult and unwise to dislocate the royal family, the British royal family, from not only a toxic colonial legacy, but one that was overtly involved with and part of deploying colonial power. So, for example, all of the ships that were deployed, during the transatlantic human trafficking trade of African people to other worlds, especially the Americas, were deployed on the command of the monarch. So all of them had a crest of the monarch, and they were all of them were explicitly on the instruction and of the command of the monarch. So this idea that, the monarch is this passive tourist attraction that just smiles and waves is absolutely false. I think another piece of that is that, like us, they also read books. They also have access to information. They also read social media. Some of them have even been to university. And I think that it is to this idea that they're living obliviously in this bubble of blissful ignorance is at best fanciful. It's absolutely fanciful. These are grown people who live in the real world. And I think that we should hold them accountable as we would any, and of course, not to mention what they symbolize as a feudal power, which is unelected, undemocratic, and seems to belong to a completely different era.
Right. Talking about being apolitical, that's a criticism that's been thrown at some African heads of state. We saw earlier visuals, images of His Excellency President Paul Kagame arriving with his wife before the coronation, ahead of the coronation, rather. And, earlier you mentioned the sort of wave of republicanism that's going through the Caribbean as growing calls are being made there to completely sever ties with the monarchy. Where is Africa in that particular conversation? Because we're still seeing representatives of African heads of states heading up to the coronation, of course, as being a part of the Commonwealth, a reinvention of sorts of what the old colonial power used to look like several decades ago. So talk to us about that and where Africa is when it comes to this broader discussion around the relevancy of the British monarchy.
Well, I don't think the Commonwealth is even an invention of sorts. It's absolutely a recreation and a continuation of, it's basically a constellation of former colonized nations, plus a few others like Rwanda, like Mozambique, who over the years have seen the Commonwealth as an institution that is economically viable. It's useful for perhaps what they view as their trade and industry opportunities and so forth. So, a lot of countries who don't even have a lineage with the United Kingdom have made requests to join or have joined over the last few. But yes, you're right. It's largely formerly colonized entities, African countries. We don't have the same relationship as the Caribbean because most African countries, all African countries are essentially republics, and we mostly have our own African or indigenous monarchs that we relate to. But that said, there's no getting away from the fact that the Commonwealth, and the very fact that in fact there was a huge controversy last year when the then Prince Charles, now King Charles, or announced almost unilaterally that he was now being pronounced as the head of the Commonwealth as well as the head of the Crown. And I think that was a moment, I think, that many Commonwealth countries really were quite amazed, or some were quite puzzled, and a few of us who are analysts of, international relations and so forth were wondering how this was going to play itself out, because, again, one was going to ask, what in an era where we are now far away from, those sort of colonial prescripts and inscripts, from where does the Crown of England derive this sort of sense of inherent right to then preside over the Commonwealth without a democratic conversation and democratic process? So even the idea of modernizing the Commonwealth is quite important, but I think there have also been very important conversations about what exactly is it that, African countries and Asian countries, for example, what I call the brown Commonwealth. I mean, there's the blue-eyed Commonwealth and then the brown Commonwealth. What is it that the brown and black Commonwealth actually derives from being in this
Pheko, unfortunately, I do have to interrupt you there. We have run out of time, but thank you so much for coming onto our program. Senior Research Fellow at the Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko.